and you managed to get out into town, or you went to the library, or did whatever, but had a break from the room. If you're online, I hope you were able to get out and have a break as well, because sitting in front of a computer is exhausting. So we will make a start. I've just checked on Moodle that the recording from this morning has downloaded, and I've just now copied a hyperlink on into the, I don't know what it's called, but the environment. So the link should work if you want to watch back the session from today. The session from the last day is there as well, so that should be fine. You've probably seen that already. So we should be okay on that. Oh, good dinner. Oh, I'm glad you had a good dinner. I managed to grab a sandwich as well. I've still got the water here, so that's fine. Brilliant. It's very strange, isn't it, this virtual world, but very exciting, I think. I think it's amazing, isn't it? The technology I just think it's incredible. Anyway, moving on. So this morning, we did a little bit of recap about types of change, planned change, emergent change. We talked about ethics. We talked about looking at possibility of ensuring that change agents were going to drive the change forward. And we've covered an awful lot of content already. Obviously, the references, and I will update the reference list, it'll be Monday before I can do it. I will put that on Moodle as well, so if you want to read round some of the other journal articles, you'll be able to look and see where it came from. This afternoon session, then, we're going to think about the last bit on ethics. Then we're going into resistance of change, and consider some different things around that. And then we're going to look back at the assignment and think through how we might begin to put that together or have some ideas from that. Again, it will be the beginning of next week. I will put some of the activities that we put as discussions and things that you've been noting down. If you wanted to use the questions as a guide and reflect on, that'd be fine. And if you're online, if you're working with the supervisor, the activities are there for you to pick and choose what you want to do. But Steve will probably inform you about that more, so that you've got that sort of idea about the roundedness of change. I've also put the dates on, as far as I know, for the submissions. I checked with Steve, he texted me back last week, so I've put the dates on there as well. So you are in January, people in the room, and the others are in May, but we will check that, so panic not. Okay. There is a register going round in here as well, so if you want to sign your name and your number, and then we know you're here, and I'll scan it in and send it in.
Excuse me, Chris, everyone online, are they all part-time?
I think so, yes. I think their class is part-time.
Sure some full-time are also there too.
I think their class is part-time. I don't know. Steve will be the person in the know. So that's fine. Right. Without further ado then, I'm hoping the microphone is switched on this time. I've tried to make sure I click the right button on that. Keep an eye out in case I didn't, because it's going to be a comedy moment otherwise. But we'll go back into the PowerPoint. We'll do that. I've got coming up. Bit of television, a bit of a clip of somebody else talking. Yeah. So I thought that might break it up this afternoon as well, rather than hearing me talk all day. So here we go. I've got to remember where I am. I'm going into Starbucks. Oops. Okay, so we looked at just before lunch those different ethical considerations, and I put some quotes and some ideas from different researchers that again you might want to read a bit more around. The college lecturers and schools ethical frameworks there as well, which I'll show you at the end. I've just got the page up for you to look at so you can see where that goes as well. And there's also the links to other things around ethics and leadership within that. In terms of the assignment, it's thinking it through, okay, how does the ethics of the leadership in the case study that you're describing, how might you argue that that's aligned to it? Is it sound? Do the choices that the leaders make or made in the change align with your ethical values? Or is there a question mark about, is there a little bit of, maybe it's not so ethical what they're doing to do? Do they not care so much about their staff and so on? So try and interweave it if you can. And I put that the question there just to reflect on the notion of ethics, because I say you need to include that as part of it. whether you're describing a change that you've led and your ethical views of that, or whether you're describing something that you're part of, or maybe you're just considering how important do you think those elements of leadership are. So we've touched a little bit on this morning, thinking about how people react at a human level, because we are all humans and we all respond to things slightly differently. And I asked you this morning to think about what your feeling about change was. Do you like change? Do you welcome it? Do you welcome it wholeheartedly and really want it to go ahead if you can see the value? Or are you somebody that thinks, well, I quite like what's happening now. The status quo, the balance, I don't really want to change. I'm quite comfortable. So we'll all have different reactions to that. And this is where we consider the idea of resistance to change. So this next section is going to look at the way that people resist change and also think about the type of way that we could maybe overcome it. So a moment's reflection again, and you could do this at a longer or more time spent on it at a later date, but just think about how you feel about change and why. And then if you feel negatively about change, maybe thinking and looking inwardly, why is that? Is it because sometimes I can't see the value? Or sometimes I feel we're being done to, and we have to do it because somebody tells us, and maybe I don't like that. Maybe I'd like to make my own decisions. So just have a little reflection now, and just think to yourself, how do you feel about change and why? And if it's maybe slightly negative, what are the reasons behind that from your own point of view? Because I think if we can think from our point of view, then when we're leading change, we can think, how might others react to this in the same sort of way? So give you a moment or two just to reflect on that. How do you feel about change and why? And would you resist it, or would you resist it in certain situations?
It depends on the situation. Yeah, it depends on the situation. Sometimes if it is not like a place you're comfortable with, for example, you just feel like, let me remain here, I don't want to change. But if you're not comfortable, you gladly accept the change. So it depends on the situation and
Situation.
It's not all changes you accept and it's not all changes you decline. So you think critically or you see how it will affect you or your situation or condition before you know if to accept or not. So you cannot just embrace changes or you decline changes. No, you have to look.
So have a think now. That's your stance.
Yeah.
How might others would they follow the same, or have a little think and reflect? Perhaps think of a couple of people that you work with.
Yeah.
What would their stance be? Again, not to sort of to say, well, this is what they would do, but just to consider it.
Yes.
On the chat. If you want to put something in on the chat, if you're you've got an idea and you need to jot that down, that's fine. You don't have to, but if you want to. Keep checking for the microphone just to make sure it's there. Okay. So we talked about Louis at the last one, and here we are with his force field analysis, which was again part of those tools from the 1940s, a long time ago, but they're still valid. And what Louis was talking about was this idea of balance. I can't do it without pointing. So this is where we are at the moment. This is where our school is, or a situation in school. And over here, if I'll just move our little screen out of the way, whoops, is the desired state of where we want to reach. So this is where we are. That's where we want to get to. It's a bit like that future vision as we talked about at the first session, the visioning. So we're going to have the idea of driving forces. So those are the people, or ourselves, or our team, that will drive the change forward. So we move from the current state up to the desired state. Now, obviously, if nobody resists, that will be ideal. However, Lewin talked about restraining forces that will be people who resist it in the organisation. And it might be actually, it's things like finance. We'd love to do this, but it's so costly we don't have the budget. So that's going to restrain us doing it. Or it might be some people are blockers and they will resist it. And the idea of the force field analysis is you think through how likely is it if we start on this change process, for instance, I don't know, a restructure of school. We've got to restructure school, we've got too many senior managers, some people have left and we can restructure. Dish out some of the management roles to people lower down. That'll save us money and that would be great and we'll be back to normal. But the restraining forces might be, actually, why would I want to take on more responsibility and not be paid anymore? Well, I don't. So I'm going to restrain. I don't want that new job, etc. So the idea behind this model is it gets you to think about who's driving it forward, but who's likely to resist or what situations will resist. You can score them, so you come across different models. So we say, well, this is quite easy. Sometimes you'll see ones with the arrows that are larger. But the idea is if the restraining force score, if you gave each one a score, is more than the driving force, then it's not going to go ahead. You can't beat it. Unless you can either increase the number pushing forward and decrease the restraining or the resistance. Does that make sense? So it's a theoretical model, but it's quite an interesting one to think through. So if there's me and I'm the only person as the head saying this is what's going to happen, and all my staff are going, no, it's not, it's unlikely to happen. Or if it does happen, it'll soon revert. So I need other people with me, hence the communication, and then we can push it forward. Or maybe it's that person who on the staff has got a lot of influence. If they were on this side, they could help drive it and reduce the resistance that way. So it's just a theoretical model, but it's just one to think through. Often leaders don't think about this shift. They say, I'm going to put the change in, but when it works, it'll be great. And they don't think about the implications around that. So, driving forces for change could be the role of the state. Education policy changes it. We've got to do it because the Secretary of State has said this is the way it's going. Changes to the curriculum or the inspection regime. It could be social pressures. So actually we need to offer breakfast clubs in our school and after school provision because lots of children are coming in without having any breakfast. And that's a social pressure on the school. It's also financial pressure because where are we going to get the money from to give them breakfast? But we need to do that. And then staffing, where are we going to get the money to fund it? And these are all those problems that could restrain it. But we could overcome them. We can move to that new design state of providing good quality food as a breakfast club so the children are nourished and ready to learn. It might be there's changes in technology. That was an external force in terms of a change. We talked about a little bit about that in the COVID side of things and the moving stuff online. It could be stakeholder demands. The CEO of the MAT in which my school's in has said we've got to raise the standards in English and maths. That's an external pressure. We've got to do it. There's no excuse. We have to. So that's an external force. We could also think about the customer needs. So it might be parents. We want extra provision. We want wraparound care. We want children to be looked after. I'm working till 6 o'clock at night, but I can't pick my children up at 3:30. I need provision from the school. So that again could be an external force that helps drive the change. We might also have internal pressures or forces. So again, it might be within here. We're growing. We've got more and more pupils coming to the school because people are perceiving it's a good school and more parents are sending them. But we haven't got the capacity in the rooms and we haven't got enough staff and the class sizes are going up and we can't move children to another class in Key Stage 1 because we can only have a limit of 30 per class. So what can we do? So that's an internal pressure, an internal force that drives the change, for instance. Other ones, I'll just pick a couple out there. These aren't an exclusive list, but it's getting the idea. But the restructuring one or the redesign of jobs, that's an internal. We haven't got the budget, or we've got a lot of inexperienced teachers coming in. Maybe they're newly qualified, or they're in the early careers, so ECT teacher as we call them. They're in the second year of teaching and they can't take on a lot of the subject areas we need them to because they're too early into the career. So that means more experienced teachers are going to have to take on another subject area and lead that. Or they're going to resist that. We can't do it any other way because NQTs aren't allowed to lead a subject and ECTs haven't necessarily got the experience. So both of these are drivers for change. We talked a lot at the first meeting about whether it's external or internal pressures. But they may result in two types of resistance, or arguably three. So the first one is individual resistance. Now this can be where an individual says, no, I'm not going to do this. And it could be outright, sort of active, no, I'm not doing it, you can't make me, etc. Or it might be more passive, where they appear to, yeah, I can do that, and then they don't. But the reasons for it are the things that are worth considering. So it might be, and often is, fear of the unknown. How am I going to cope with 35 in my class? I've never taught more than 29. It could also be this uncertainty. The class sizes are going up. 2 years down the line, when we've got some money, we can have another classroom, and then the classes can be smaller. We can take up, but at the moment, we can't get the funding for that. So that uncertainty. Well, so how long am I going to teach 35 kids in a class? How long? Well, we don't know. Right, well, I'm going to leave. There's also something around potential loss of power. So if I'm a deputy head, for instance, and I've led assessment, and the head teacher says, actually, can you stop leading assessment? I'm going to give it to this person to do that. I want you to lead on behaviour and safeguarding or whatever. Suddenly, I've lost that power. Potentially. Well, I'm the assessment person. I've done all the assessment. I do the data. I do my presentations to governors. I'm losing all that. How will other people, will they think I've done a bad job? So the perception would then make me resist. No, I'm not doing that. I want to keep assessment. Give it to somebody else, the behaviour. So loss of power can also trigger resistance, as can loss of rewards. So again, in England, we have what's called TLR points, teaching additional funding that was given for particular roles, and they were originally intended to be flexible. So I will give you some more money for you to run this project. When the project's over, the money will come back, and then we'll use the money for somebody else for another project. What's tended to happen is it's been remaining with that person who's finished the project, but then hangs on to the money, and they perceive it as a full-time pay rise, as it were. So the loss of rewards, hang on, I don't want to give up that money, I'm used to it, but I finished my project, but I want the money. So that can cause resistance. The perceived lack of skills is another one. So we were saying about that bit about online learning. A lot of staff went, well, I can't do that, and instantly put the barriers up. I can't teach online, I don't know how to do it, I'm not doing it. And then find any excuse not to. The other one is the potential loss of skills. So thinking back to that example I gave earlier about somebody who's leading maths, and then they're given English, yeah, but all my expertise and knowledge is in maths. And now I've got no or very little expertise in English as such, to the extent that I need it, and I'm going to lose all that mathematical knowledge. So I don't want to give it up. So we can resist at an individual level for all kinds of reasons. And as a leader, we need to think if we're asking somebody to take on a different role or to do something different, that they may resist at an individual level for any of these or other reasons. We can't know necessarily because they may not tell us. It might be direct confrontation, I'm not doing it, I don't agree. Or it might be, oh yes, yeah. There's something called learned helplessness that you might come across. So that's a way of resisting from an individual basis. So if I do a really bad job at this, online learning for instance, somebody will say, do you know what, don't do that, I'll take that off you. Or if they say, I want you to write the behaviour policy, and I'm so hopeless at doing it, and I make myself so hopeless, it's called learned helplessness. Somebody will go, no, look, do you know what, I'll do it. Don't worry about it, I'll do it. And then the pressure's off you. So there's all ways that individuals can resist, but it's thinking as a leader what they might do. We might also get, in terms of restraining forces, organisational resistance. So the scenario I said earlier, perhaps where a school is failing and a new head teacher's put in, and all the staff are there are going, this person's come in to shift this, let's see them. We've seen our 4 head teachers before, and here's somebody else coming to tell us what to do. And it does happen. So you might get all kinds of reasons here. There might be that there's a lack of resources, and they'd say that's fine. That sort of stops things changing. The culture or the rituals. We are so entrenched in doing what we're doing. You can tell us what we should do, but we're not going to do it. We'll all stick together and we won't do what we're told. So you get the whole organisation, and then you get that conflict. The threat to resource allocation might be something, and the group norms would be something else. So we've always done it this way, and we're not changing it. And none of us are changing it. You know, you're asking this person to give up their allowances, to give it to different people, but they're not going to, and we'll get the unions involved, and you can't go to that sort of extreme. So that's another aspect of it. This is also where culture goes into it, and explanation and communication as a way of reducing that organisational resistance. So as a leader, it's thinking, are most of the staff going to agree to this? Are they all going to band together and we get organisational resistance, or is it going to be 1 or 2? And what are the reasons for that? So just taking it a stage further, really, we've looked at the individual resistance and the organisation, but you might get a group. So it might be in a primary school. Oh, it's the Key Stage 1. They've always, or early years, they've always had a higher budget, and they need a higher budget because of the things they do. But we've got to use the budget somewhere else, so they're going to have to take a reduction. And the people that are getting the money will be fine, but they will resist. Or the converse is the other way around, for instance. So we can identify that restraining force at different levels, and as a leader, it's thinking through how can we reduce that and work around it so that the change that we want to implement will be effective. Mullins talks about, again, people being naturally wary of change. Some people absolutely embrace it. Some people are really wary and don't like it, because I'm quite happy. A simplistic view. I'm a year 4 teacher, so I teach 8-year-olds, and now I'm being asked to go down and work with the 5-year-olds. Or I'm going up to 11s and they've got the SATs. You know, that's outside my comfort zone. I'm quite happy in year 4. I've done it for 3 or 4 years. I don't want to change. So that could be the way. It talks about this in terms of the management, therefore, understanding the reasons why there is resistance. So in that scenario, if I was the leader and I wanted to move a teacher from year 4 into the infants, I might say, you've done a really, really good job on this, if they have. And it's got to be genuine, hasn't it? You can't just say it because of the case. But I want to use your expertise to really develop the staff around in early years to get the kids up to the best possible start. And that's why I've asked you to move, because I know you've got the skills and I know you're worried about it, etc. So you try and negate that and get them on side with you. It has to be genuine, of course, as we know, because people can soon see things that aren't genuine. But that's about this idea of defined strategy for initiation of change. So I would have a quiet word with them before I announced it to the staff as a whole, or announce it to the person in a broader context. Some heads don't do that. They have a meeting at the last day of the year and go, right, you're in so-and-so, you're in so-and-so, you're in so-and-so. Then you instantly get resistance. They also do it on the last week of term to say there's not time for anybody to come back and say, I don't want to do this because it's holiday. So they use that almost as an excuse and a way around it. It's not a good way of doing it, but some do. Better to consult. And you might say, I know you really wanted to go into this year group, but you've got the skills to go into here. So you're again lowering that resistance and explaining why. So again, linking it to your assignment, whatever you're describing, we'll look a little bit more about this. Think about, are there any elements, or were there any elements where staff resisted the change, or where the change resistance was lowered? So I want to write about changing the marking policy, and it went through all absolutely fine. So why did nobody resist? What was it that the head did that reduced any resistance, because inevitably somebody won't like it. And then if you think about it, it might then put you on the path of thinking how they skillfully took the staff with them. Think about, again, depending on your role in there, how the resistance is perceived. Some people don't like, particularly some leaders, don't like to be challenged. It's a challenge to my authority. Others that are open will say, right, oh, I never thought of that. Okay, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. Or thank you for your opinion, but I still want this to happen. People often feel and resist more when they don't feel they've been listened to. So maybe that's something that you could work into. If the change that you're describing was unsuccessful, was it due to everybody resisting too much and the head not recognising or the leader not recognising that, and therefore it didn't go through? The last question there is about, as a leader or a manager, do you see some of the response and view people's opinions in a positive way? Thank you for telling me that. I've never thought that that's what you would think. And then you can know about it. Or do they just go, no, I don't want to listen. So there's something there. Now, it depends on what you're describing as to whether it was a successful outcome. If it was, how did they reduce any resistance? If it wasn't, why didn't it go through? We said 75% of change projects fail. And it's usually that the staff resist, or it can often be the staff resist, or the resistance forces are too high. And then it's unpicking the reasons why. And that's the interesting bit. A power and influence table might be something that you want to look at. So this is from Hayes. Again, there's a whole lot around this, but I just think this is quite an interesting one. So we might think of, where do our staff fit? Are they the meddlers in that they come in and go, oh, do you know what? The head's saying he's going to change such and such. What do you think about it? And so they stir people up, but in a quiet way. Are they bystanders? Perhaps they've got very little influence, but they just don't do it. They don't get involved, they just sit back. And that's almost like a passive resistance. Or a lot of powerful influence might come from the sponsors or blockers. No, we're not doing this. The staff are behind me on this and we're not going to do this through. Or equally, I suppose you could flip that in terms of the change. If it's positive, that could have a positive impact. And then you've got this helplessness. That's where that the notion of learned helplessness comes in. If I do a really bad job, nobody will ever ask me again, and I won't be asked to do something. A lot of people have that mentality. I haven't got time to take that on. So if I do it badly, that reduces my workload, because somebody else will take it off me. That seems a strange way, but people do often think like that. So there's helpless victims bit, and then there's the beneficiaries. So that's less power and influence, but it has a high attitude in terms of that. So you could think about in your case study, we're all the stuff. It's a mix. Any staff's going to have a mix of people, and we said we respond differently to what we've been asked to change, depending on our own feelings. So who is affected by the change, and who's got the stake in it? Bystander. Actually, it's not going to affect me. I'm in year 5. I've been staying in the same class, so I don't care or really bother whether the year 4 teacher has to go into reception. But if they're my friends, I might do, and if they've got me on the side. So thinking those things through. We're painting a very negative view of this, aren't I? But the resistance to change is a thing that often leaders don't consider, and how they might negate that and reduce that resistance is key, really. So again, a couple of other reflective questions about how you might view resistance. Often heads and leaders don't like people to resist them because they see it as a challenge to their authority. But the more enlightened will give it a forum where people can voice their concerns. And that perhaps goes back to the idea about a learning community, and we're all in it together as the organisation. So we genuinely want to hear what we think is going to go wrong, and then what we can do to address it.
So I think meeting is done.
That's it? Oh, oops. Is it? Are we okay? Okay, so so again, perhaps the view of yourself looking in your case study about that, about how leaders perceived it. And you can't know, we can't get inside everybody's head, and we might be reflecting, it might be something that's happened in the past, and you're looking back.
Yeah, it is about the past experience, or we can do that for the future prospect too.
Either.
Like we are planning to show some leading change that we think it can be the part of our institute, but we think this can be the resistance. Like you have been telling us that this you have done and this kind of restrictions that happened to you, but can we write in the future perspective that we want to do that?
That's what we want.
Yeah. If you're planning a project, yes, you can do it that way. When it comes to the writing, and I'll say this when we go to the assignment, you need to write in third person, not from first person. So as I am thinking, you would say the leader has considered.
So we have
as leader.
Yeah, so you're the leader maybe, and you're reflecting on what you're going to do, but you write it in the third person.
Yeah, like using a theory or any case study from the past and applying it in the future with some slight changes and that.
Yes, you could do. So you could say the leaders did similar. In the past, the leader did this, when you're actually writing about yourself, but the leader did this, and arguably they should have done such and such. So when the leader plans the next thing, this is what they might do. So you're writing it that. So it could be a future change project, and then you're applying, but you're reflecting and using. Yeah.
And sometimes there are two types of changes. Like there is a kind of comparison change between two institutes. Like if a institute is leading the rank high, but the other one is lacking. But the system for the betterment of children in the lacking one is good, but the leading one is not good. But it is leading, so they are looking forward to them. Is that the right way to do something?
You could do, you could do a comparison between the two. What did leaders do in the school that's perceived good? Is it they don't actually do anything? We're finding that in England at the moment, a lot of outstanding schools are not outstanding because leaders have stood still. They 10, 15 years ago, when a different head and different staff were there, they were outstanding, and now they're not. So you could do a comparison if you've got the experience and the knowledge of that, comparing either different institutions and thinking about what the leaders have done and the difference it's made.
That's a kind of thing.
Or you could do it from the point of view, this is a leader who was successful in that school and then went to a different school and wasn't so successful. So what was it about the one that stopped them being successful in the other? Again, in school improvement, there's often been historically a perception if you've got an outstanding head teacher, if you take them from that school and put them into a school that's really struggling, they'll make it better. But it depends, they might do, but they might not, because they may have been outstanding based on what the staff have done and they've taken the glory, or the staff might have been more receptive there and the others have actually got to be worked with a lot more to get them up. And that's fine, you can reflect on however you want to put it together. That would make it really interesting, actually. Think it's going to be me that's reading it at the end of the day, and I like being interested and thinking, seeing your process. So make it really engaging if you can. But yeah, that's great. Hope you get some ideas, I can tell. So an individual's resistance then. These are other. So from a cognitive point of view, without us even consciously thinking of it, we often resist. And it might be, here we say, the threat to the comfort zone. It may be, actually we didn't even think about as leaders how that person would react, but it could be that they're outside of it. We perceive sometimes people that come as really confident and knowledgeable, actually inside aren't feeling that. They actually feel, they put out this demeanour, I know everything, I can do this and I can do that, but they may lack confidence or the knowledge. So we need to know the staff and know at a human level, because that could be that out of the comfort zone type of thing. There might also be the lack of trust. One school I worked in, they'd had 5 head teachers and 3 different people had taken over the running of the school, and the school was still inadequate. And the staff's trust level was absolutely rock bottom, because any leader that was put in found it too hard and left, and they felt really, really let down. I don't know what happened in the end, but the next head going in would need to have worked a lot on the trust of getting them to value. And actually, you know, they didn't trust anybody because if it was a bit difficult, the head just went off. And then a new head was put in, and they didn't stay long enough to make a difference. So this huge lack of trust. So that could be a reason why the school remained where it was. There might also be, I put contradictory assessments. So this idea about the solution won't work. Well, it might not work, but it might do. You might get the comeback from staff, well, we did it last time and it didn't work. But maybe it was because it wasn't seen through, or there might have been reasons that weren't understood by the staff as to why it wasn't seen to work. There may also be a preference for an alternative solution, and that's where perhaps leaders need to say, what do you think? Does anybody have a different idea? Go back to the scenario I said about the local authority, where the funding was cut and potentially redundancies were going to happen, and the local authority said, what can we do to raise money to keep our jobs and keep everything going, not who's going to be the first to be given redundancy. So it was a different way of thinking. The selective perception is sometimes, as a leader, we don't tell everybody everything they need to know, because maybe it's not within their remit, and sometimes we don't want to burden them with it. So it may be that we're restructuring, but we don't really want to know or worry people that they may lose their jobs. So we tell them we need to do a restructure, and can you move to so-and-so, can you take this on? But the real reason is we haven't got the money to pay everybody at the current levels. So partial view of the change situation, or the perception. I will be the one that, as I said earlier, I'm usually fairly positive, and I will go with the change if I can see the value of it. If I can't see the value of it, and I might not have the whole picture, I want to know. I want to know the picture, then I can say, yes, I'll go with that. But that's the way I am, but other people may be different. So a partial view of a change situation can lead to resistance. We've talked a lot about the security and the habit and knowing where we are and doing the same that we've always done, so that might be another one. And the security of the past. Sometimes we see the past in a different light. Oh, it used to be fine 5 years ago. It was great. You know, let's go back to that. We get that a lot in education. We have a cyclical nature, don't we? Or we seem to. We used to do that, but we don't now. But we used to be so good. And sometimes it wasn't good, and that's why it moved on, but we perceived that it was. That's the security of the past. Adams and Straw talk a lot about letting go of the past. Sometimes people want to hang on to it too. When the last head was here, he always did it this way. Well, we never did that under the last head. You often hear that sort of language. So security of the past is one. And then there's the fear of the unknown. Oh, what's going to happen if I go and teach the little children in year 4 and 5, and I've only taught year 6 for ages? Am I going to be able to work with that? You know? I'm really frightened about it. And then, so I don't really want to move down, and I'm not going to move down. You can't make me. And then you get that. And they may not say that, but that might be inwardly what they're feeling. So there's cognitive reasons. And again, as a leader, it's thinking, how can we help people to articulate that so that we understand and then reduce that resistance. I'm not going to read all these to you. I'm going to let you have a little bit of reading there, so move that up there. So we talk about low tolerance for change. We said at the previous session that a leader's role is looking at the organisation and thinking, are they ready to change? Can we move forward? Is everybody, or is the culture there that it's so resistant, we need to work on that first? Sometimes heads, particularly if you move in school or you take a new role in a different place, you just think, oh, it's great, I'll do it straight away. And that tolerance for change, you don't know what's happened beforehand. There's a lot of information, we don't know what we don't know, particularly going into a different place. So that might have got us thinking. So just have a little look at those. Some of these things will relate to the next slide I'm going to show you. But again, these could be this idea about low tolerance. We can't do another change because we're just too tired and exhausted from it. picking up on a couple of those points, not all of them, but a couple. The mistrust, that goes what we said about trust and honesty. Management motives are suspicious. Why are they asking us to do this? Why are we having to change this way? So that's about culture and ethos. And the other potential is this frustration one, actually. If I move down or out of this, I won't get a chance to go for another job that perhaps I really want, because I will perceive that I'm being less skilled or de-skilled. It might not be the case, but that might be the perception. There's a whole lot in terms of both an individual, but also at an organisational level. And the other one is, the big one is anxiety. Fear of not being able to cope. How will we cope with it? How will I cope with this? And we get anxious, so we resist. I'm not going to do that because. So again, as a leader, it's thinking of, do any of these apply in this situation? Or could they apply? And what can I do to reduce them? This links to something called the Kubler-Ross cycle, or the coping cycle. It's old research. Basically what Kubler-Ross did was to look at, if we have a bereavement or we suffer a loss in our lives, there's a predictable pattern that we follow. So if one of our relatives dies, we have that particular order of things that happen. What they found was the same applies to people when they're asked to change, that they might resist. So the first bit is this denial bit, or disbelief of it happening, and hoping that it'll just go away and be better. If I ignore it, it won't have happened. We could apply this to all kinds of life, but this is where it came from originally. Then there's anger. The next stage is, once you've got over believing that it couldn't have happened and it has, then you get cross. I'm really cross and being moved to year 6. You know, I was quite happy in year 3. I don't want to move up. Then there's the bargaining side of things. So trying to reason, come on, you know I'm better down there than up here. And then moving to that. Then there's this dip, the depression bit. So actually, do you know what? There's nothing I can do about this. Oh no, and we feel deflated. And finally, there's the acceptance, which is the beginning of the curve. And what Kubler-Ross found is that this is predictable. So originally, in terms of a loss, but it's the way we respond as humans. So you may have seen this in other guises. So that's our mood, whether it goes up or down against time. So there's instant shock. Now I know this seems quite extreme, but even to the point of changing your handwriting policy or the marking, a lot of people, I can't believe it. I do hours marking, and the kids love my marking, and it makes a big difference. Now I've got to change. Well, I'm not going to do it. No way. No way I'm changing. You can't make me. And then it's, well, everybody else is, so I might as well just give up. Then we get there. And you get to that bottom bit, and that's where they call it letting go or acceptance of reality. Actually, the head is leading this, all the staff are on board. I'm going to have to get over it. If we can't get over that bit, we stay at the bottom, and then we stay in that sort of depressive note. But mostly, we tend to go up then once we've accepted it. So if we as leaders recognise that this is a typical way that people react in the case of something that they really don't want to do, we need to try and tease it out to help them. It's the same for learning, actually. We can talk about a learning dip. You've got an exam to do, an assignment coming up in January. Oh no, it can't be. Dad, I've only got a month. Oh no, well, I'm not going to get it in. I'll ask for an extension. I'll put it in later, or I won't do it. And then there's, oh no, well, how am I going to start this? But then you'll get over it, and it'll be like, oh yeah, I can do this. It's going to be fine, and we'll be fine. I didn't obviously want to apply that to your assignment, but I just thought, well, that does make, you might be feeling that a little bit. So the psychological reaction, we can't, this is the way our brains work, and we're conditioned. So as a head or a leader, we don't have to be a head of a leader, we can be any leader really. This is the way that we react, or people react. In other walks of life, if we say something that perhaps people don't want to do, they would also respond with it. So we know that it's predictable, we can do something about it perhaps. And also recognising sometimes people don't ever get out of the bottom. So yeah, psychological reaction. More on that as put Hayes and Hyde, but it's based on Kubler-Ross's coping curve originally. So we know work and education is stressful and change is stressful because it's coming at us constantly. And sometimes it's huge and sometimes we have no control, and that lack of control can help make us feel anxious about it. So this little bit here, that Buchanan and Huzinski did some other survey evidence, and this idea is the fact that it's the pace of change that's the problem rather than the actual change itself. And so this idea of middle management burnout, people are exhausted. Thinking of these last 2 weeks in schools, I've been doing a lot of work with head teachers, and everywhere I go, their heads are exhausted. It's a long term anyway, but they've had so many changes coming on, and they're finding it really hard to cope with that. But if they're positive, they can see a way forward. So we have to think about that. This bit about it says with each change, people have to spend time learning new tasks and skills. It's the same with me and technology. You know, we're doing face-to-face and we're doing online. That's two things. Oh no, I can't do both at the same time. That's no, and then you sort of think, yeah, I could probably cope. Be fine. So there's something there, maybe, that would link into your project or your case study. Another bit, the following emotions associated with changing middle and senior managers or leaders, if you can give it that. These are words that came out of the research. I colour-coded it to green because those are the positives. But if you look at it, most of these words are negative in terms of the idea of change, unless I've missed any. But yeah, so the research and the language that's used, anxious and fear and dread, violence sometimes in that terms of anger, revenge. When Ofsted come back the next time, we'll tell them, we'll get them. That's what teacher said to me. You know? Powerlessness. Oh no, we've got to do this. And yet actually you've got optimism. So you do have positives, but most of it's negative. Is that the human condition? I don't know. Do we always go for negative? In education we often do. Those of you that have ever been observed teaching, or if you observe teaching, what tends to happen is somebody goes, okay, I know I did that wrong. I know that didn't go very well. And you try to say, yeah, but everything went really well. It was a really good lesson. No, but that bit didn't. So we often hang on to the negative, don't we? Because that's the way we are in education. We always want to do better. So yeah, in journey to endure as change, or we've got to do it. Or is it an opportunity to improve things? Yeah, we can reduce workload on the marking. And that will make the kids learn better and give us more time to plan better things for them. So again, it depends a little bit on our own personalities as well. But this was from Buchanan and Huzinski's change or stress of change research. Another way of looking at it, that from the passive resistance, we talked about that, to the indifference and moving up to acceptance. So hopefully we can shift people from there. And these are the way that, again, people's attitudes might go. I can sabotage it. There's no way I'm changing my marking in my book. I'm doing it this way. And sometimes it's the most silly things. In one school, they went away from red pens to green pens. And some people didn't like green pens. Oh, why can't I use purple? I want to use pink. It's a colour. But it really was about the marking and that being told that they didn't like. And then obviously we've got ignoring. So if I ignore it long enough, the head will get bored and we'll go back to what we always did. That's where as a leader, you've got to have a clear vision of it. Is it worth this battle? And are we going to see it all the way through? Because if we don't, people will just ignore and go back to what they do. And I won't necessarily know it. And then suddenly I'll realise, and it might be too late. That's often if I have a walk around with the head, or they say, come and see this. This is what our policy is. This is what we do. And you go into the classroom and they're not doing it. And they go, well, they should be doing it, but they're not. And you're thinking, yeah, this is staff have ignored the change that you put in place. They've gone back to what they want to do. So that says a lot about leadership in that, nothing about the staff necessarily. So again, that might be something just to consider. So where would you fit on there in different things? If you reflect back to perhaps the change that you were involved in. at which point I thought we would break from me talking, and we're just going to hear Professor Mark Müller-Epstein talking about change. Hopefully I got this queued up in the right place. I need to make sure that I click the add the sound bit. There is a link on the video as well and on the Moodle site, so you can re-watch this. I just thought it gives you a different voice about talking about change. So it should be. I'm looking. Let's see, as you are. Anything else? Takes. Again. It disappeared. Okay. If you can't hear the sound online, can you just tell me? But I'm going to put it on now. Hopefully I've included and pressed all the right buttons, but let me know if you can't hear it. There should be a transcript as well. Some sound as well.
So we're talking about transformation and change, right? And there's a lot of change around us. Technology is changing, societies are changing, our personal lives are changing. But the only constant in life is really change. But why is change often so scary? Why do we not see the opportunities but only the risks? Why is it so hard to get out of the comfortable status quo we're in right now to move forward? Well, of course, we need some energy, right? To come to one place, you need some energy. You need to move forward, you need to find some energy somewhere within or around you. And then, of course, we're human. We have emotions. And very often, our emotions get the better of us when confronted with dramatic transformational change around us. Professor Schlossberg has a great theory and a great model of transition that really explains the emotional roller coaster we are going through when confronted with radical transformation. Something big happens to us or around us or with us, the first thing is denial. This is not happening. It's not happening to us. It's not happening now. Eventually, though, reality sinks in. A lot of fear, anxiety take over. What do we do? What does it mean for us? Will we have enough to eat? Will we have a roof over our head? What will we be loved? Who knows? We're stressed. We try not to deal with it. But eventually, we'll try to find out how to practice some things. Try to say, oh, this works. This might not work. We're learning things. And then we start to discover the opportunities in the transformation. We're getting excited. We want to change the world and want to change everybody around us and with us and realize everybody else might be, while we are super enthusiastic, might be still on the other side and be stuck in fear and anger and depression. So this is how it works. Sometimes it goes in seconds, sometimes it takes years, and unfortunately sometimes people and complete organizations get stuck somewhere in the middle of deep depression, unproductivity, and fear. So our goal, we have reached the excitement about the transformation we want to drive, is to take the other people with us and help them through this emotional roller coaster. How do we do this? First, you want to have a super clear vision of what this transformation actually looks like. It has to be clear, it has to be short, it has to be crisp. And by the way, 80% of all change management projects fail because they don't have a good vision. So if you get one thing right, this has a huge opportunity. Second, be clear on the impact. Of course, the negative impact if you don't move, or the people around you don't move, the organizations don't move. But also the positive impact that addresses the fears, the concerns, and the search for opportunities that is out there and with all of us, that gives them something to hold on, to get the energy, to get through this curve and get out and be enthusiastic and motivated and drive things forward. Communicate. If you're dealing with somebody who's in denial or a deep fear, they are not reading a 5-page document. So you have to be very clear and crisp what's in it for them, why they don't have to be afraid, and how they can help to move things forward and make it better. Over-communicate again and again and again, according to where somebody is on their emotional curve. Doesn't matter if you're enthusiastic, if they're afraid, you need to be addressing them where they are and to deal with their fears. Fourth, don't do it alone. Build a team that helps you to understand the big picture. a diverse team with diverse viewpoints sharpens your vision, gets a better strategy, get a better plan, and you have a lot of allies that can help people and organizations through every stage of the emotional curve. And last but not least, you own the change. You are the leader of the change you want to see and you want to drive. Celebrate the victories step by step while you are going through this transformation. So people stay engaged, they see the progress, and you start a movement, and more people will join and support you in that journey. And at the end, don't forget to celebrate the victory. Celebrate, harness the energy, because one thing is sure, change is happening again. But if you have successfully managed a radical transformation once, the second time, it's not easy, but it's going to be easier. With that, I would invite you. We're in a world full of opportunities. Some of them look scary, but they are definitely out there to make our world a better place. And I would like you to become the change you want to see in the world. Thank you very much.
You may have seen that clip before. It is there on YouTube, and you might want to just rerun it again and compare some of the things that he said, which align to some of the things that we've seen today. And again, you might think about considering that alongside your case study, and thinking, actually, is this what leaders do or have done? I mean, this is what I need to do, depending on your leadership. So again, just change your voice there, just to reiterate some of those key points. Final section, then we'll have a break, and then we'll look at the assignments a bit further. So a little bit more about organisational resistance. We talked a lot about that. I talked to you at the first session around Adams and Strauss research, and saying, typically things like it's always the same, like this happens every year, we've always done it this way, why should we change? And getting that buy-in is key. They talk about breaking the links to the past, because if we always look back and think that's better, we're never going to move forward. So avoiding normalisation, particularly, as he was just saying there, celebrating the short wins and telling people that it's going well, if it is, or recognising maybe if it isn't, what we need to do to tweak it, will avoid them going back to looking at the time from before. Excuse me, hiccups there. This bit about resolving problems. Sometimes leaders don't, because they haven't got that trust with the staff and they don't listen to what's being said. There could be real reasons why people are saying, I don't think this is working, because so we need to listen to them and also make them feel that they can contribute and that it's valued, even if it transpires that it isn't what we wanted them to do. This craving certainty goes back to that human condition. We said the last point there about making excuses. Sometimes that's about accountability. And sometimes if we don't hold staff accountable, or they know that we're not going to, or we say we're going to be making them accountable and then we don't follow it through, they will know that and they begin to make excuses. Oh, I didn't know because I didn't think you were going to come and check. Or, well, I've run out of time and I was going to mention it, but I didn't come and talk to you about it. So don't let excuses divert from the change, because otherwise people will, as they will revert to their old ways and they go back to the past, because the past is a comfort, isn't it? So those things about avoiding normalisation, certainly at an organisational level, particularly if you're trying to work with an organisation that is in a challenging situation and they do need to change and move forward, you've got to get them to go with you. That might be something to consider. It may lead you on to think about, and this will link into Steve's work on leadership and leadership styles and traits. You'll see when you get to the end of it, everything interweaves. We all have our own sections, but everything is interlinked. So traditional leaders, as opposed to transformational leaders. So traditional leaders are often self-assured and complacent. Yeah, we're an outstanding school, I lead it well, the staff are great. They might also believe their own version. Well, we're still outstanding, we still think our school is great. we've got a really strong staff. The quality of education is brilliant, and might be self-defeating on that. Accepting and rationalising the organisational myths. So it's always been like that. We've always done it this way. We've always got good results here. Is that always going to be the case, or do we need to reflect on it? They often justify their actions, or again, thinking back to that Monday example I gave you earlier, having no sense of urgency. I need to change, believe it. Yeah, we'll deal about it further on, when actually we need to deal about it there and then. So that's a sort of traditional leader. The transformational leader side would be things like listening and adapting, taking feedback from people and genuinely valuing it. This idea about progression and thriving. Actually, if you get a buzz about learning, or a buzz about working in an organisation, and it's an exciting place to be, you're going to want to do more of it. But that comes from the leadership. The openness to new ways of thinking. I've always done it this way, so why do I need to change? Actually, look at the opportunities there are. We could do it this way, we could do it that way, and so on. Alongside things like the challenging viewpoints. And again, they're resolving setbacks, not hiding them. We didn't go well, so let's not tell anybody. We'll see if we can gloss over it. No, actually, it's not gone well. This has gone wrong. So let's unpick why as a staff and see what we could have done differently. And then that bit about acting with urgency, not putting it up to tomorrow, but doing it now. So traditional leadership or transformational leadership. Sometimes transformational leadership is viewed as being very, very quick-paced. This, we're transforming it. And actually, it may be about those attributes and traits that as a human leader we would show and use to move an establishment forward. Again, it's all the idea about avoiding normalisation, and a traditional leader would stick with the past really, or stick with what it is. I suppose a transformational leader will think carefully about what they want to see the future being like. You may have worked with either of these, and now you can reflect on them. I can think of one or two that fit in that, and I can only actually think of one person that I'd say was a transformational leader, possibly two actually. I think about even perhaps even one here. Who knows? Conscious of time and conscious of your concentration, you've done really, really well so far. I'm just going to mention this about other areas that you might want to consider. So I'm not going to go through every point, but I think this one, the Carlisle's point about this not defining the problems closely enough or too narrow, and not thinking about the ripples or the breadth of the change and what would happen, that's often a problem. We sometimes see it's too simplistic. Or we do this, it'll be fine. And actually there might be other things that we haven't thought about. This idea about saturation is something else to think of. The relative knowledge or relevant knowledge and how that applies to the situation that we're trying to move. And I suppose a key from the empathy and the emotional intelligence side from a leader is about that inability to see somebody else's perspective. We used to say walking in other person's shoes or sitting where they're sitting. We used to do years ago what was called a day in the life of in inspection. We would follow a child round to see what their day was like in the school. It's really interesting. I suppose you ever have the time to do it now, we don't, but we used to do that. See what it's like. If you're an SEN child, what's your day like typically? How many times have you spoken to or supported? What's your interaction like? We'd follow perhaps a group or a more able child perhaps and see what that happened. It's very interesting. What's a day in a life? So that bit about seeing different viewpoints is something that you could consider maybe. Other bits just picking up on emotional blocks, the fear of risk taking. Heads are often risk resistant. If we do that, after come in and don't like it, we're going to be in trouble. Or what if our results drop as a result of doing this? Well, they might drop, but they might go up. Or you might have a better, like you said, we were saying about early years, colleague at the front, putting some money and some real quality education into early years. It might take money from other parts, but actually it might make it even better. So as those children progress through, they've got a really solid base. That's a real positive. So this group thinking might be something else to consider. And the cultural blocks, we've talked a lot about that. The skilled incompetence is another way of thinking of it. I get really good at being really bad at doing things, so people won't ask me. That's a skill in itself, arguably, but could we not turn it on its head and use that to be a positive maybe? The avoiding criticism and conflict. Again, I keep going back to my Monday experience, but that head teacher She didn't like the criticism she'd had from Ofsted. She didn't like the conflict with the staff, or arguably with me as well. It's interesting, she said, it's been really helpful today, but I don't think I want you to come back to my school. That's fine. Now, why is that? I don't know. Maybe it's because we pointed out a few things that she didn't really like to hear. Who knows? So some other cultural blocks there. I'm not going to go through everyone, as I say. You can refer back to those afterwards and consider what it might look like. So if these are the negatives, how can we turn them around as a leader? You've got individual resistance, you've possibly got group or organisational resistance. What can we do to lessen that and to make it clear that we can drive that improvement? Education and communication, so clear about that message about what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're going to do it, alongside with what you need and how we can support you to get there. Everybody being participants and getting involved in the project. Maybe there's a core that leads it, but then other people involved too. As a leader, ensuring that we facilitate the opportunities for our staff and we support them if they need additional support or help or resources, and that they know that. Negotiation and agreement is something as well, getting that buy-in. And that often we forget to check that. Is everybody committed and knows what we want them to do? Sometimes we just assume we've said it, they'll understand it. So that might be something else that helps. Manipulation, manipulation and co-option. Yeah, manipulating in a nice way, not in a negative way, I would say, but maybe making it easy for them. You can't lead your subject. Why is that? Because you've got no time. And so what if we give you some non-contact time? We'll have a supply teacher come, we'll pay for them to come, take your class, and that frees you some time up. Now, actually, the manipulation there, it's a bit of, well, actually, I'm being given time in school, teaching time, to do this. That must be an important job. So there's a bit of manipulation there, but it's a positive, I would say. And then they talk about direction and reliance on explicit and implicit coercion. It goes a little bit to that bit about, I'll do this if you do that, and if you don't do that, then I'll do this. Depends on the sort of leader you are, maybe, but maybe there's a time. Sometimes there may just be the time that this is not good enough, and you have to do this. So maybe that's something else to think through. Again, you might be thinking in your own case study or experience, maybe there was an element of that sort of top-down coercion, arguably. Final slide on this section for the moment, and then we will break. Taking several ideas being proposed, understanding the cause of the resistance we talked a lot about, reducing the uncertainty so people are really clear about why we're doing what we're doing and what difference it will make. This bit about the participation and communication, which is really about organisational development, isn't it? Everybody being involved in that. And then possibly the coercive strategy at the end. I wouldn't necessarily go down that route, but there may be times when you would need to. Right. I thought at this stage we would probably need a comfort break or a quick grab a drink. So it's 20 to 3. Should we have 15 minutes? Is that long enough to go and get a drink if you want? To have a breather, and then we'll just go into the assignment, just revisit that, and then that will probably see us through for today, if that's okay. Any questions from anybody? Yeah, check-ins on the apps. Don't worry, if you put your name into the chat at some stage, it should have recorded that, and the university can check at this end. And we've got a register that's gone around somewhere. We were going to do a team photo, weren't we? You suggested that. Everybody smart, give a thumbs up, just to prove we were here. But maybe we'll do that afterwards. So we'll have a 10-15 minute break, if that's okay, and then we'll just look at the assignment in a little bit more detail, and then move forward from there. Is that okay? If you've got any queries, pop them into the chat, and we will see you in 10 minutes. That's
It's,
the
it's
volume, is
in
it?
her phone.
What was it?
No, it is in her phone.
Oh, it's your phone. I thought,
Yeah.
I thought it was this feeding back. I'm being confused by the sounds. Okay then, I think we'll make a start. We're nearly there. We're nearly the end of the day. Thank goodness. So this last section, we'll just very quickly revisit what we've covered as some points, which I put on a slide to remind us, and then we'll think about the assignments. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how to write it, and maybe how to structure it as well. And then hopefully everything will make sense. As I say, I'll put some activities online that you might want to go back, and I'll add some more at the beginning of next week. I've been a bit busy this week doing things, so I've got some of the things up there, but I'll put some of the bits and the recordings of today as well. I'll make sure I do that before I leave here, to make sure it's on if you want to watch any bits again, and if that's useful. Right, so just summarising the content that we've gone through an awful lot. We've probably done about 6 months worth of studying today. We thought about how we might define change, whether it's nice and tight or whether it's huge and complicated, and all those different versions, bounded and unbounded, that link back to that first session. We thought a little bit about plan change, and there was some more at the first session that you can go and review. And we talked about emergent change, 2 different models of change that leaders might use. We looked at a bit of the criticisms of the change models, because change is so varied and coming along so much, a plan change approach may not be the most appropriate. Then we thought about the ethics of leadership, and also our own personal ethics and moral view, and how that might influence decisions that we make as a leader or leaders that we work with. Then we thought about the actual leadership of change and how we might use that to think about whether we can drive the change forward or whether the resistance will be too high. And we also thought about the different types of resistance as an individual, a group, or an organisation. We also thought about how, as a leader, we might overcome that with communication and clarity of vision and so on. All of these things will stand you in good stead when you become, or if you are leaders already, when you drive any change further. So although we're thinking about the assignments, some of these things will help you in your future careers, I would say, which is why I think it's quite a good thing to consider and do. The assignment then. We talked about it being analytical. So think about the context and think about what it is that you want to describe. Think about whether it's you that led it or whether somebody else led it and you were part of it. You could also think, if you didn't actually lead the project, maybe you're just waiting to get your first leadership role, you might then think about the comparison of the different models. So you could argue the difference between emergent models and a plan change model, and you could do it that way, and the ethical side of things. It's easier if you've got something to talk about because you can put the theories against that, as opposed to just looking at the theories. But if you haven't got the experience, you may need to do it that way. The word limit we talked before, aim for about 5,000 words. If it's slightly under, that's okay. If it's 3,000 words, it's not going to be discussed enough, because we need to really argue and debate it and discuss and think about your points as you go through. It needs to show a good understanding of the change that you're describing, thinking it broadly. So although I was saying things like, well, it's a change in marking policy, that's the change, but there's a lot of complexity around that. The ripple effect and the effect of the staff, the reason for it, where the leaders decided that they were going to implement it because of something that they've been told, and so on. So try and think it broadly in the same way as I've tried to structure the sessions for you. So you think broadly around and the challenge for leaders. It needs to be a critical analysis there, and I've just put of the learning that can be derived from it. So if it was successful, and now you reflect back, if it's something that's happened in the past, you might analyse it and say, well, it was really successful because I recognise now the leader went in this particular structure. Or if it wasn't successful, it's because the resistance of the staff was so much, the leader didn't recognise it, didn't hold them accountable, and therefore the change failed. So you could reflect back in that way. As you do that, try and back up your opinions with the academic research or quotations or references to support it. So it isn't just you saying it, but you've got others that you're aligning to. And that shows your breadth of reading, but it also shows that you're using it for a purpose. So when you're doing things like the referencing of it, some students put a chunk of text that they found. This is really interesting. I'll put it in my assignment here. Then I'll say a little bit more about the project. Or when I found another quote, I'll put it here. So it becomes a bit chunky. Try and work it in. So if you're making a point, try and weave the research alongside it. So it could be argued that the leader chose to go with a plan change approach, which aligned quite closely to Kotter, because, etc., etc. Try and be tentative rather than exact or emphatic. So we tend not to make, in academic writing, we don't say it is definite or it definitely isn't, because somebody else will have a different opinion. I might say, the only way to lead properly is to use a plan change approach. Somebody else might say, oh no, that's not right. So the language I would use if I really felt it would be, it could be suggested, keep it impersonal, it could be suggested that a plan change approach is very effective. Kotter and Fullan also support this view, for instance. So try not to be emphatic, try and use I suggest, be tentative in it. Still make the point, because somebody else could argue with you. Steve might argue with me about what I've said, and he'd say something different. And I think, well, he's not, I think differently. So Steve suggests this, however, I would suggest that this is the case. So we don't go for an absolute, if that makes sense. Because there's always somebody that could argue something different. And actually, who's to say who's right or wrong? Okay, so it tends to be speculative. Use the language of analysis. Use a critical analysis if you can. You talked a little bit earlier about your choice, so you could, because it says in the assignment title, one or more specific school settings. So if you've got a change that you've been involved in one school, you could describe that. Or if you know that another school did the same thing, but it had a different outcome, you could analyse that and compare the two. And that might be quite interesting, if you've got the knowledge of that. Bear in mind that the leaders may not necessarily have used any formal method. They may just have turned up and done it without knowing the academics that sits beneath it. For everything that we do in life, there is somewhere an academic structure or philosophy that might underpin that. So if we can use that and be reflective, that's what we'd like in the essay. Okay. It might be as well that you're reflecting back on a situation that was in the past, and that's quite a useful thing to be able to do. But you might always say, it talks about what might be applied in the future. So you could argue that based on what I've seen, if this was applied in a similar situation in the future, it would be more likely to have a positive impact. So you could do that in terms of the future. So you could do both bits. You need to write it in the third person. So don't write it, I did this and I did that and I did the other. It would be the leader did this, the leader did that. So keep it third person. Try and take a step back and reflect on, if it's you, reflect on your own things, but say it as if it was somebody looking at you. Does that make sense? Yes. You try and keep it like that. So academic language, impersonal language, speculative language. Steve will have done a lot of this on your initial induction, I think. The study guides are quite useful that are on Moodle. It gives you the idea about how to work and build an argument. Referencing, we use APA, the most recent one. It's all online for you. You can reference it using things like Google Scholar that will give you references if you've read anything from there, and you can use the university login to get to research that's on there as well if it isn't in our library. If you're doing in-text citation, use the name-date convention. So whatever we use is the surname and then the date straight after with brackets around. So bracket, name, comma, date, close bracket. If you're quoting directly, check APA because there are different ways of doing that. And if there's multiple authors, there's different ways of doing that. Try and make it active referencing though, wherever possible, to avoid that. Here's a chunk, here's a bit more, here's another chunk. Because remember, it's me reading it, and I've got a lot to read, and I like to be, it's nice, it needs to flow. Okay. So, more guidance from Stephen from the inductions that you've had earlier to be online. Think about the change that you're going to use in your assignment. Give it the context, because I don't know where you've worked or where you are working or what you're describing. It could be a hospital, but it could be a secondary school, or it could be a college, or it might be in a different country completely. So give us the context there so we've got something to hang it on to. Then think about how does this change fit to some of the management theories? And you could argue it doesn't exactly match, and that's fine. It could be argued on this change that the leaders were doing that it started off on Kotter's 8th step, but it stopped at the 4th step, and then it just seemed to go into something else. So you could argue it that way. So try and use maybe one or two main, if it's a plan change approach structure that you're looking at, use those as the main, and then use other subsidiary references to back that up. If it's emergent, you're arguing it's an emergent approach that they took, think about those qualities and the human traits that the leader would display or did display, or you displayed if you're the leader, and use those. But again, back it up from the reference. So you're not making anything up, and you're not plagiarising anybody, but you're using the references to support your point. Identify the challenges that the leaders came up against. What was it, as you perceived, or as you perceived they perceived, the main challenge for them? And it might be you reflect back and think, that's why they had a lot of initial meetings, because they were trying to get the communication and the buy-in. And you describe it from that. So this is where it's reflecting back on what you know. As I said, you need to think about the ethical issues. You might like some of those that I've shared with you earlier that are on the other PowerPoints. You might read some of those. In terms of references, always try and, if ever possible, go back to the original source. So use primary references, not secondary. So in somebody else's book, somebody said something, and it's referencing back, because often there's a danger it might have meant something else. So go back wherever you can to the source, and then use that as the reference. At the end of your observations, try and summarise what it is that you've talked about, and try and come to some conclusion. If the change was unsuccessful, that's okay, it doesn't have to be successful, but argue and reflect, why was it unsuccessful? So if this was to happen again in the future, it could be argued that leaders needed to do X, Y, or Z, and it would be more successful. So you're reflecting on that bit just in the summary, in your conclusion. Or if it was successful, what was it about it that you summarised? Why was it so successful from the point of view of the leaders? What was it they did? And just summarising that at the end. So we tend to just get the main assignment going through in terms of the context, the challenges, the theories that might underpin or be argued that underpin it, because the leaders may not have known that that's what they were doing, but just looking back at it, we might recognise that that's actually what they were doing. And then summarise at the end. You don't have to follow this, but this is a potential organisation of it. So in your introduction, Set out what it is that you're going to discuss in your assignment, or you might be explaining something or something that you're considering. You might want to tell me how you're going to look at it. So I'm going to look at it from the point of view of the leader, or this will reflect the leader's choices that they made and how they instigated a change in the school. And then give the context. So you set the theme in that introduction. In the main part of the assignment then, go on and look at it in more detail, so expand on that. So the first thing the leader did was to set a vision, and they did it in this way, which aligns to Fulham's view of sharing and communicating ideas to make sure that the change is successful, etc. Again, try and be critical in your analysis and unpick it using the research that you've got alongside. Planning to your paragraphs carefully is the other thing. So you might have a main paragraph, have a main idea in there that you expand, and then you go on to the next point and expand that up. So try and break it up into a logical sequence. So you're telling the events maybe, but you're reflecting within there as well. And again, focus on the change and the leader's role in the change, not just describing what was changed. So just going back to the one I said earlier, the government had implemented a new art policy, and the change was really implementation and getting staff to change it. But the first assignment just told me about the changes and all the wonderful things that the art policy was going to do. It said nothing about how the leader had thought about it, shared it with the staff, driven it forward, reflected, shared small wins or anything else. So need both sides of it. And then in the conclusion, sum up what your thoughts are about this, reflecting back. And if there's future learning that could be gleaned from it, or that you feel would be useful in other contexts, put that into there, based on what you've thought. Other people might disagree with you, but that's academic writing. If it's founded on good, solid evidence, that's helpful. Try not to put any new material into the conclusion as well. It tends to be a summary and conclusion of what you've already said, not, oh, this is another idea, I'll pop that in there. If you've got another idea you want to add, put it into the main body. Does that make sense? The guidance from the way that you submit it needs to be in a Word document. You need to put the assignment in the top. In fact, it's probably easy if I just put a list onto Moodle of there. But you need your student number and the title, and then your assignment title, and then work down and write. It needs to be in Arial 11, double space all the work through. You submit it via Turnitin, and when the submission date comes up, there should be a link put on Moodle. You click on that and upload your work. I've just put this last little bit about just checking that you include ethics and values, because that is a part that you have to put in. So again, try and interweave that. You might talk about the ethics of leadership, that's fine, but then apply it to the context. Don't leave your submission to the last minute. If you want to send me a draft, and if I've got a chance, I'll read it through and put your thoughts and send it back to you. But don't leave it till like an hour before the deadline's there, because if anything goes wrong, and you've seen today technology can defeat us, you're then in panic mode. So give yourself enough time before you submit it. If you feel that you haven't got enough time to write it by the deadline, you can apply for an extension. So you can self-certificate. You have to notify Steve or me. We have to send you the form or the link. But you can have a week, I think it is, as an extension. Or if needs be, you can have a longer extension. But don't leave it to the last minute. If you suddenly think, work, life, family, everything else comes along, and it might be you can't submit it on time. So use the extension if you need to. But don't leave it to the last minute. Okay. In terms of reading, I would suggest, you're probably super organised, when I did mine years ago, great quote, and I'd forget to write down where I got it from. So I was frantically rushing through all my books trying to find out, where have I got this from? So be ordered and organised about it. Some people like to do a little bit of reading every day. Anything that's particularly pertinent, jot down in your notebook and note it. Some people like to do it as a block. I'm going to have 4 days and I'm going to just do it. Do whatever's best for you. But again, keep that the reading wide. You need to realise or to remember that it's me that's reading it or Steve, and we want to see what else you've read and how you've applied it to the context. We can't cover everything in these lectures. There's plenty of other things that you can link to. If you wanted to include things like the TED Talks or references up there, that's fine. The APA will tell you how to reference that. It's all in the guidance on there. At the back of your assignment, or the end of your assignment, you need to put a reference on anything that you've included within. Again, there's a set format for doing that. Don't include references that you haven't included. So you might have read a lot of stuff, but don't list everything you've read, only put in what you've included in your assignment. Ideally, you'd have taken lots of bits from everywhere and made it really rich and fantastic. But if you do that, just put the bibliography or the references section at the back as to what you've included in there, and make sure it follows the APA guidance. There are programs, and I'm sure Word probably does it as well, so make sure you've got those all fine, and that would be great. Deadlines then. As far as I know, these are the deadlines. So if you're full-time, it's 1 PM by Friday the 20th of January, which is odd because it's usually a Thursday, but Steve said it's the Friday the 20th, so we'll go with that. And then if you're part-time, it's the Thursday the 11th of May. If you need to contact me, that's my university email. Because I work on other emails all the time, I pop in every couple of other days, perhaps every 3 days, and check them. So I will try and get back to you as soon as I can. If everybody emails all at once, it's going to be a bit tricky. But if you do need anything from there, particularly,
so we have to send, if we want to send you a draft of our assignment, so we will use this email.
Yeah, if you send a draft assignment or you've mapped it out, send it to that. But I'll try and get back as soon as I can, but I can't promise it will be instant.
So it's email.
Yeah, it's on Moodle when you log in or your email.
Yeah.
We use the Chester email, so it'll come to that. What I'll try and do is, if you send it in Word, just put some comments or review notes, and then you can accept, or just some thoughts really for you. If you leave it too long, though, don't leave it right to the last minute. And I am going to have some time off over Christmas a little bit, so don't send it Christmas Eve because I won't be reading.
I have not come across it. How do we say it to submit?
How do you?
Return intent.
On turn it in?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just come out of that actually. I've just stopped the share on that. I've got the right page, just bear with me. I will show you what it looks like, I think. There we go. I see a slightly different page to the go back into here. No. Find it. It's going to let me do it. I'm trying to share it with everybody, but it's just not playing, is it? Right. Okay. So on Moodle, when you log in, this is my screen, but you should get something similar. Whoops. There we are. The news forums, if there's any changes, I'll put it in there. Whoop. It's going mad. There we are. Okay. So if you click on that, you'll get this menu. So obviously today, the links and the PowerPoints are there. The video, I've put the one video up from this morning, I've put the other one up beneath that. Those are some of the activities, and there are some other activities from day one. So just click on the day one tab and they're in there. They're not homework to do, but they might just guide you if you wanted to reflect or think through. There's a couple of other things that I found as I go along I might add in. At the bottom, again, there will be a click that says submission. Submission. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to come back to the file now. Going back. I see a different page slightly, but at the bottom it says submission, and on there will be the link. What I'll try and do is on the forum there, the news forum, when the submission link's up there, I'll just put you a note in saying, but it'll be before the 20th of Jan. So I'll click it on there so that you know it's there.
Okay, it's going to come up.
It will come up, and then it's just a little square. You click on that, and then you submit in that way. It would be the same if you've done any other assignments previously. It's exactly the same. Usually Holly sets that up for us, but that's where it would sit. I just see a different page from my end, because obviously I'm a student, but that's where it sits. There we go. So it'll say submissions, and you click on that, and it'll be there. I'll just see if there's anything else. Yeah, it would usually be sort of about here.
So right now, even if you have assignment that you have done, what you can submit it now?
No. No, that's what it looks like. This isn't it, but it'll just say there, have the date, the number. You click on that, and then it should take you straight into it. There we are, and then you just submit it to there. So students, put yourself in there, and then you upload it. Okay. So you see a slightly different page to me, but that's where it should be. Right. Unless there's anything else, I hope you've got some thoughts now about what you might write about. You've got plenty to draw on. Keep your reading wide. Enjoy reading about it, because there's lots of extra things that you can find out about. Thank you for your attendance and the contributions. I hope you've got a lot out of today. It's got you thinking, and good luck with your assignments. And I shall see you, I don't know, with the virtual or whoever will. But
when are we having this class?
I have no idea. That this is me with you for the second session, and then I don't know what. That's all I'm doing. I think in the leadership side this year. So
okay, for this term, this.
Yeah, this is. I've got one more on coaching and mentoring, but that's the second session for some other students. But yeah. Okay. So thank you for those of you online.
Hi, Chris.
And,
can I ask a question about assignment?
Yeah.
As you mentioned, we can discuss one or more school setting. If that means we can choose more than one setting, or unless we're using the same issue for comparing.
Yes, you could do. If you've got two schools with the same issue, you could compare it that way from the leadership side. Yes, that would be fine.
How about if I just choose one school, we have two things. We have two changing issues. Can we discuss two? Is that possible?
If perhaps focus on one, but if you needed to, you could discuss the two, because then you could compare perhaps the way that the different issues were dealt with by the same leadership.
Okay, so unless we're going to comparison, if not, we just focus on one only, right?
Because it seems a lot, 5,000 words seems a lot, but it probably isn't if you're looking at it. So think about the one. But having said that, as I say, if it's two smaller change things and you're looking from one leadership, you could do it that way and compare perhaps the different approaches, and maybe if one worked better than the other, you could then discuss that. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it. So if we don't have any leadership experience, can we talk about something in generic? For example, talk some big company issue like the Apple or something.
I would try and do it as something that you've been involved in, ideally, because you can speak to it from the inside, as it were. You could use some things like Apple and compare to, if there was an issue that you thought this aligns or matches quite closely with Apple. Because there are lots of it, Apple and Toyota are often cited in terms of the way that their leadership's put together and how they led change. So you could compare to that, but probably stick it within, if your experience is within school.
Okay. So just focus on personal experience will be better, right?
Yeah, but try and write it in the third person, don't write it in first.
Okay.
So if you're not saying I did that, it would be the leader did this, the leader did that. So take a step back so you're reflecting on yourself and writing in third person. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, and one more thing is that, as you mentioned, the 4,000 words is including or excluding the reference?
It's excluding. So you
okay.
Yeah, your references don't count towards your word count. It's just what's in the assignment. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Good luck.
Sir, I have a question.
Okay.
Sir, we can discuss only UK school system or leadership, or we can discuss our own country school system and leadership.
No, I'll do your own country. That would be better because you've got